The door slams. Not hard. Careful, footsteps pause. Someone is listening. A candle flickers. The air feels wrong. 'Tis still. A man breathes in the dark, slow, controlled, afraid to move outside. Armor scrapes stone, not marching. Waiting, a whisper passes through the room. No name spoken, no order given. Something has already been decided. The silence stretches, longer than it should. A shadow crosses the wall, then another keys. Turn, change shift, the candle dies. No one screams, no. Struggle echoes down the corridor, just the sound of fabric brushing skin. A single breath, cut short, and then dash nothing. By morning, rumors will spread. By nightfall, truth will be sealed. No witnesses will agree. No. Record will explain. Some will say it was mercy, others will say it was revenge, but all will ask the same thing in hushed voices behind locked doors. Who really ordered what happened in the dark? Early 14th century England stood on a knife's edge. Power existed, but stability did not. The crown was rich in title, poor in trust. Wars drained treasuries. Nobles questioned loyalty. The people watched closely, waiting for cracks. Across the channel, France loomed, not as a distant enemy, but as a constant pressure. Borders shifted, alliances strained. Every marriage, treaty, and delay carried weight. England's military strength was uneven. Castles stood tall, but discipline inside them weakened. Orders conflicted, commanders competed. The king's authority, once unquestioned, now faced whispers. Not rebellion yet, but something colder at court. Power no longer flowed from the throne alone. It moved through favorites, through private rooms, through quiet promises. Nobles resented exclusion. Veterans felt ignored. Messages went unanswered. Beyond the walls, famine and taxes sharpened resentment. Inside, politics turned personal. Marriage meant to bind kingdoms. Instead became a battlefield. Diplomacy failed quietly before it failed publicly. The court was full, yet isolated. Every smile hid calculation. Every silence carried risk. England was not collapsing. It was rotting slowly, a thumb within. And somewhere between France and England, between loyalty and humiliation, Queen watched, waited. Not openly, not loudly, but with patience sharpened by years of neglect. History would later call this period unstable. Contemporaries called it dangerous, because when authority weakens, someone always steps forward to claim it, and not all take power with banners raised. The men guarding the king were trained to notice everything. Every step, every sound, every change in routine. They rose before dawn. Armor cleaned in silence. Weapons inspected again and again, not from fear, but habit. Discipline ruled their days. Mistakes were punished. Questions were not welcomed. They knew the rules. Protect the king. Obey the chain of command. Speak only when ordered. Many had served for years. They had seen war. They had seen betrayal, but always at a distance. Here, danger felt different. Quieter. Orders arrived late, sometimes not at all. Messengers contradicted one another. Guard rotations shifted without explanation. The soldiers followed commands anyway, because disobedience carried consequences worse than confusion. Inside the palace, servants whispered. Outside, nobles lingered longer than necessary. The guards noticed who came and went, who was allowed near, who suddenly wasn't. They noticed the queen's absence, then her return. They noticed how authority moved when she spoke, not officially, but effectively. None of them knew the full story. They were not meant to. Their duty was proximity, not understanding. Still, unease settled in, the kind that makes sleep lighter, dreams shorter. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something was approaching, not an attack, not a rebellion. Something internal, and when power shifts quietly, those closest to it are the last to be told. The first warning sign was how quietly things changed, not suddenly, not dramatically. Quiet changes were the most dangerous. Schedules shifted without notice. Guard rotations were altered verbally, never written down. Men who had stood the same post for months were reassigned overnight. With no explanation and no appeal, questions were met with tight expressions, or worse, polite smiles. The king's chambers grew harder to access. Not officially restricted, just delayed keys took longer to arrive. Doors that once opened immediately now required approval from someone unseen. Messengers came and went at odd hours. Some arrived late at night, some left before. At dawn, no records remained of what they carried. Servants noticed. Too, they always did. Meals were prepared but returned untouched. Water jugs remained full. Curtains stayed, drawn even during the day. Voices dropped when footsteps approached. Conversations ended mid-sentence. The palace felt occupied by people who didn't want to be overheard. At night, movement increased instead of fading. Soft steps echoed along stone corridors, well past curfew. Not hurried, not sneaking. Purposeful torches appeared, where none were assigned, then vanished again. A guard reported hearing murmured voices. Behind a locked door, voices that stopped the moment he paused to listen. He never reported it again. Another noticed a nobleman entering a restricted passage without escort. The noble did not acknowledge him, did not slow down, the guard was later told. The man had never been there. The king himself was seen less and less. When he did appear, it was brief, controlled, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. His demeanor had changed, not angry, not frightened, withdrawn as if decisions had already been made, and he was no longer part of them. Letters arrived from abroad. They were opened privately, answered quickly, and sealed again. No one knew what they contained. Rumors spread quietly through the lower halls, that authority had shifted, that certain names were no longer spoken, that others suddenly carried weight far beyond their rank, but rumors were dangerous. So they stayed unspoken. The guards felt it most during the long hours before dawn. The stillness pressed. Heavier than armor, sleep came in fragments. Dreams ended abruptly. Every sound felt intentional. One night, a familiar patrol failed to pass through a checkpoint. No alarm was raised, no explanation given when asked the next morning. No one admitted they had been scheduled at all. Another night, the door that should have been locked was found open. Nothing inside was disturbed. Nothing missing, except certainty. The palace no longer felt like a seat of power. It felt like a place holding its breath, and beneath all of it, beneath the silence, the closed doors, the unanswered questions, was the sense that whatever was coming would not arrive with shouts or steel. It would arrive quietly, already authorized, already approved, and by the time anyone realized what the warning signs meant, it would be far too late to stop anything. The night did not announce itself. It slipped into place like it belonged there. Torches burned lower than usual. Their light didn't reach the ceiling. Shadows gathered instead. Guards stood where they had been told to stand. No more, no less. No one questioned why the corridors felt emptier. No one asked why the silence felt heavier. Somewhere deep inside the palace, the door opened, not forced, not rushed, opened by someone who had permission. Footsteps followed, measured, unhurried. They did not echo the way strangers' steps usually did. Another door closed. A guard shifted his weight. Listened. Nothing. No signal passed. No call for assistance. Minutes stretched. The air grew thick, as if even sound had been ordered to stay quiet. A torch flickered and nearly died before catching again. Its light revealed nothing unusual, nothing that demanded attention. That was the strangest part. Somewhere nearby, fabric brushed against stone, a muted sound, easily ignored. Elsewhere, key turned slowly in a lock, not testing it, not fumbling. Certain the guards remained still. They had been told. No movement was required. Time lost its shape. There was no scream, no struggle carried down the hall. If something happened, it happened behind walls built to keep secrets. One guard later recalled hearing a breath, not a gasp, not a cry, just a breath that stopped. Then silence returned, deeper than before. Hours passed. Nothing changed. No bells rang. No orders came. At some point before dawn, footsteps retraced their path. Fewer this time. Doors closed again. Carefully, the palace resumed its stillness, as if rehearsed. When the sky finally lightened, routine hesitated. A servant approached a chamber and stopped. Waited, no response. He waited longer than protocol allowed. Still nothing. A second servant joined him, then a third. They exchanged glances, not words. A message was sent quietly. Guards were summoned without urgency. No alarm, no rush. Just a careful gathering of people who did not yet understand what they were meant to see or not see. The door was opened. Inside, everything appeared. Normal, undisturbed. No sign of chaos, no overturned furniture, no trace of violence. Only absence. Something essential was missing. Someone in the room felt colder than the corridor. Outside, as if it had been sealed too long, no one spoke. Asterisk orders followed quickly after. Too quickly, access restricted, witnesses separated, questions discouraged. A version of events was prepared before most people even knew what had happened. Some were told nothing occurred, others were told it had already been handled by mid-morning.
Out.
Movement resumed. By noon, silence was enforced. By evening, the palace behaved as though the night had passed uneventfully. But those who had stood watch felt it. The sense that they had been present for something? Irreversible, without ever being invited to understand it. Later, reports would disagree on times, on who was present, on what was heard. Some would insist there had been activity. Others would swear there had been none. Official records would become strangely precise in some places, and completely blank in others. No one could agree on what happened in those hours. Only that when morning came, the balance of power had changed, and whatever occurred in the dark had left no proof behind, only consequences, the kind that history would argue over for centuries, and the most unsettling detail of all. Not that something happened unseen, but that it happened without resistance, without chaos, without a single sound demanding attention, as if the palace itself had already accepted the outcome. Asterisk. Right. By the time the palace acknowledged that something was wrong, the night had already been rewritten, not officially. Not yet, but quietly. Orders began circulating before questions were fully formed. Searches were announced, carefully limited in scope. Rooms nearby were inspected first. Then only the ones that made sense, the ones that didn't, were ignored. Guards were questioned in pairs, never together. Each was asked the same questions, but not in the same order. Times were repeated until they blurred. What hour did you hear footsteps? Which corridor were you assigned to? Who gave the order to remain at post? Answers conflicted immediately. One guard insisted he heard movement shortly after midnight. Another swore nothing occurred until much later. A third claimed he was never assigned to the area at all, despite standing there the night before. Logs were brought forward, then quietly corrected. Times were adjusted to match recollection. Names were spelled differently. Some were removed entirely. Servants were questioned. Next, they spoke softly, carefully. Many claimed they noticed nothing unusual. Others mentioned doors opening, footsteps passing, torches moving where they should not have been. Those statements were not recorded. Instead, investigators focused on what could be proven, which was very little. Search parties expanded outward. Corridors, courtyards, storage. Rooms, nothing. No signs of forced entry. No damaged locks. No marks, suggesting a struggle. The absence of evidence became the official explanation. Privately, it raised more concern. Messages were sent to nearby strongholds. Quiet inquiries framed as routine. No one reported seeing anyone leave. No one reported anyone arriving. That silence, too, was documented. Foreign envoys were asked discreet questions. They denied knowledge. Too quickly, letters were reviewed. Some were missing, No one admitted handling them. A timeline was drafted, then redrafted. Certain hours were condensed. Others expanded. What could not be explained was simply omitted by the second day. The tone changed. The investigation was no longer about discovery. It was about containment. Questions narrowed instead of widening. Witnesses were instructed not to speak beyond what they had already said. Some were reassigned. Others dismissed entirely. A few were sent away for their own safety. No formal accusation was made. No public declaration followed. Instead, an understanding spread through the palace. This was not a mystery to be solved. It was a situation to be concluded. When records were finalized, they appeared complete. Dates aligned. Events followed order. Only those who had been present noticed what was missing. Names that should have been there. Moments that had been shortened. Details smoothed over until they disappeared. Years later, chroniclers would attempt to reconstruct the search. They would find contradictions, reports referencing orders that did not exist. Witnesses quoted in one account, absent in another. Documents that ended abruptly, mid-sentence. Some files were sealed. Others destroyed the official version, hardened quickly, too quickly, and while no one openly admitted confusion, the way the investigation ended said more than the investigation itself. There were no arrests. No trials, no final explanation. Just a conclusion delivered without proof. Accepted without protest, as if the truth had been decided before the search ever began, and for those who had been closest. Those who stood watch. Who heard the silence, the unanswered questions did not. Fade, they were simply buried. Where? History would later find them and realize the investigation had never been about finding out what happened. It had been about ensuring no one ever asked again. Asterisk when official answers fail. Theories take their place. Not all at once. Slowly, carefully, each shaped by fragments, contradictions, and what history chose not to preserve. The first theory is the one most often repeated, because it is the neatest. According to this view, what happened was not personal. It was practical. The kingdom was unstable. The crown had lost authority. Loyalty was fractured. Supporters of this theory argue that removal was inevitable, that the situation demanded resolution. Not mercy, they point to timing. To how quickly power reorganized afterward. To how smoothly opposition dissolved. They note that no emergency followed, no panic, no vacuum. Everything transitioned as if prepared in advance. But this theory struggles with one question. If it was purely political, why all the secrecy? Why erase witnesses? Why seal records? Political acts usually seek justification. This one avoided it, which leads to the second theory. Some historians believe the answer lies across the channel. They point to correspondence, incomplete, fragmented, and suspiciously absent at key moments. They note how certain foreign interests benefited almost immediately. Borders stabilized. Diplomatic tensions eased. Old disputes quietly disappeared under this theory. The incident was not ordered locally but encouraged from afar. Subtle pressure. Strategic silence. A shared understanding that some problems solve themselves best in the dark. Yet this theory, too, has cracks. No direct command survives. No written proof links foreign hands to the final moment. Only circumstantial alignment. And alignment is not evidence, which opens the door to a third, more unsettling idea. This theory focuses not on kingdoms but on humiliation, years of exclusion, public disregard, private insult. Supporters argue that what unfolded was deeply personal, that power was taken not just to rule, but to punish. They point to how carefully access was controlled, who was present and who was deliberately absent, how familiar the movements that night appeared to those watching, not the work of strangers, but of insiders. And yet, if it was revenge, why deny it? Why allow history to speculate endlessly rather than claim justification? Revenge, after all, often demands recognition. This one, avoided it completely. Which brings us to the final theory, the one whispered most quietly. This theory suggests we are missing something essential, not a motive, but a fact, something discovered, something learned, something that made exposure impossible. Under this view, the secrecy was not about guilt, it was about protection, not of a person, but of the institution itself. Supporters of this theory point to destroyed records, to abrupt narrative changes, to how chroniclers suddenly shifted tone. They argue that history was edited not to hide an act, but to hide what led to it. Yet this theory collapses under its own weight, because if the truth were truly that dangerous, why leave any trail at all? Why allow rumors to survive? Unless uncertainty itself was the safest outcome. Each theory explains something. None explain everything, and that may be intentional, because uncertainty prevents blame from settling in one place. It keeps responsibility diffuse, shared, unprovable, which is exactly where power prefers it. Centuries later, records still disagree. Accounts still conflict. Motives still blur. History gives us fragments enough to question, never enough to conclude. And perhaps the greatest hidden truth is this: whatever happened that night worked exactly as intended, because we are still arguing about it, and we always will be. Asterisk. History often pretends to be clear: dates, names, outcomes. But sometimes, clarity is an illusion created after the fact. What happened did not disappear because it was forgotten. It disappeared because it was inconvenient. Too many people benefited from silence. Too many futures depended on it. The kingdom moved on. Power settled into new hands. Records were finalized, sealed, and archived. Life continued, which may have been the most unsettling detail of all. No monument marked the moment. No official reckoning followed. Just a quiet acceptance that whatever had occurred was no longer open for discussion. Centuries later, we are left with fragments, conflicting chronicles, edited documents, testimonies that contradict themselves. Not because historians failed, but because they were never given the full story. And perhaps they were never meant to be. Because if the truth were known with certainty, it would force uncomfortable questions. About power, about loyalty, about how isolated legitimacy can change hands when the right doors close at the right time. So the story remains unfinished. Was it justice, carried out in silence? Was it revenge disguised as order? Or was it something even colder? A decision made for the sake of stability, no matter the cost. History refuses to answer, and maybe that refusal is the final clue. Because when the truth is too dangerous to record, uncertainty becomes the safest legacy. Now it's your turn. What do you think really happened? Which theory fits best, and which feels wrong? Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the only place the truth survives is in the questions we refuse to stop asking.